My name is Hannah Reyes. I'm 31 years old and I live in Portland, Oregon. And exactly 1 week before Thanksgiving, my mother called me just to say the words I will probably never forget. "You're banned from Thanksgiving this year, idiot." There was a pause. Then, in the background, I heard it. My sister Brittany's laughter. Sharp, amused, like she'd been waiting her whole life for this scene. That laugh wasn't just sound. It was a memory, an echo from 1,000 similar moments. Every family dinner, every phone call, every reminder that I was the one they liked least. For a long moment I stood there, the phone pressed against my ear, my body frozen between anger and disbelief. I waited for my mother to say it was a joke. I waited for her voice to soften, to say something like, "Oh, come on, don't be so serious." But she didn't. She was serious. Behind her, I could hear plates clattering, someone turning on the oven, the warm domestic chaos of a family preparing for a holiday. A holiday I was suddenly erased from. I took a deep breath, my voice coming out quieter than I expected. "Okay, Mom. Have a nice holiday." And I meant it, because at that moment, something inside me, something small and scared and always trying to please, just went still. I hung up the phone and stared at my reflection in the window. It was raining again, the kind of gray Portland rain that feels endless. For years, I had imagined Thanksgiving with them as a chance to prove something, that I wasn't the problem, that I could still belong. But now, I didn't feel like proving anything. Instead of crying, I poured myself a cup of coffee, turned off my phone, and sat in silence. The apartment around me was clean, warm, and still. My own place, my own peace. But the quiet wasn't empty. It was full of memories. I grew up in Boise, Idaho, in a modest 2-story house with blue shutters and a maple tree out front. My sister Brittany was the golden child from the moment she was born. She had blonde curls, a dimpled smile, and that kind of charisma that drew everyone to her. People called her Sunshine. Me? I was the quiet one, the bookish one, the girl who asked too many questions and smiled too little. At every family gathering, I could feel it. That invisible contrast between us. When Brittany walked into a room, my parents' faces lit up. When I did, they just looked relieved that I hadn't done anything wrong. My mother used to sigh and say, "Hannah always kills the mood." It became a joke, one that everyone laughed at, except me. I still remember one Thanksgiving when I was 14. It was the first time I ever tried to bake something on my own, an apple pie. I followed the recipe perfectly, peeled the apples thin, mixed the cinnamon and sugar just right, brushed the crust with butter, and watched it turn golden brown in the oven. When it was done, I felt a tiny spark of pride, the kind that kids rarely get to feel when they grow up unseen. I carried it carefully to the table where Mom was setting out the silverware. She glanced at it once and wrinkled her nose. "It looks dry," she said flatly, and a little sad. I stood there, pie in hand, trying to smile, trying not to let the sting show. Before I could respond, Brittany ran in with a tray of burned dinner rolls, blackened, smoke rising, the smell of char filling the room. She laughed. "Oops," Dad chuckled, waving the smoke away. "At least she tried," he said warmly. "Good effort, kiddo." Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. I looked down at my pie, at the perfect crust I'd worked so hard on, and all I could feel was heat. From the dish, from my face, from the shame of being invisible in my own family. That night, I stood at the sink washing dishes that weren't mine. The sound of laughter floated from the living room, the same laughter that used to make me feel like maybe I was part of something, until I realized I was just the punchline. Through the foggy kitchen window, I could see the Christmas lights my dad had hung early that year. My reflection in the glass looked blurry, almost like someone else's face. I remember whispering to myself, next year will be different. But it never was. Over the years, the pattern became predictable. Brittany failed a class? She's just under pressure. I got a B+? What happened to the A, Hannah? Brittany forgot to feed the dog? She's busy. I did all the chores? Well, you're responsible. That's what we expect. Every good thing I did was expected. Every mistake I made was magnified. By the time I was 18, I stopped trying to make them proud. I stopped hoping for equal love. I learned to survive family gatherings like storms, quiet, braced, waiting for the rain to stop. Now, years later, I sat in my Portland apartment replaying my mother's voice in my head. You're banned from Thanksgiving, idiot. It wasn't the insult that hurt most. It was the ease with which she said it, like she'd been waiting years for an excuse. I poured another cup of coffee, the steam curling in the air. My apartment was small but beautiful. Bookshelves lined the wall, candles half burned, a few photos on the shelf. None of them of my family. The silence that used to make me ache now felt like armor. Outside, I watched a neighbor carry grocery bags through the drizzle, probably preparing for their own family dinner. A pang of envy twisted in my chest before softening into something calmer. Maybe loneliness wasn't the enemy I'd always thought it was. Maybe it was the pause before something new begins. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at my phone. It buzzed once. A group chat message from my family. Can someone bring extra napkins? Brittany's hosting? No one noticed I wasn't there. No one even remembered to take me off the thread. I watched the conversation unfold. Jokes, emojis, pictures of turkeys and pies. Brittany sent a selfie with the caption, "The family's favorite chef in action." My mom replied with a string of heart emojis. My dad said, "We're so proud of you, Britt." I don't know why I kept scrolling. Maybe I wanted to find a single word that included me. A wish you were here, a sorry for the misunderstanding. But there was nothing. Just digital proof that I'd never been part of the warmth I kept chasing. After a while, I muted the chat. Then I deleted it. The next morning, I woke early. The city was gray and quiet. Fog pressed low against the streets. I made coffee, watched the mist drift between the buildings, and realized something simple. I didn't owe them my sadness. For years, I'd treated my family's rejection like a wound I had to heal. But maybe it was just a door. One I could walk through and never return to. That day, I packed a small overnight bag. Not because I was running away, but because I was done waiting for invitations. I tossed a sweater, jeans, a few books, and my car keys inside. As I zipped the bag shut, my eyes landed on the postcard my late grandfather once sent me. It showed a snowy mountain cabin and said, "Peace is not where you're told to be. It's where you choose to stand." For the first time, those words made sense. I didn't know where I was going yet. Maybe nowhere. Maybe somewhere quiet. Somewhere mine. But wherever it was, I knew one thing. I wasn't going to spend another Thanksgiving begging for love that had to be earned. I slipped on my coat, grabbed my keys, and stepped outside. The air was cold, damp, and sharp with the scent of rain. As I locked the door behind me, I whispered to no one in particular. Maybe to my childhood self, maybe to the silence itself. This year, I'll have my own Thanksgiving. And for the first time in my life, the words didn't sound lonely. They sounded like freedom. The drive out of Portland felt like shedding skin. Rain chased my windshield, streaking silver across the glass, while the city lights blurred into distant, trembling constellations. I didn't have a real plan, just a direction. East, toward the quiet, toward anywhere that didn't echo with my mother's voice. As the highway unwound, I felt the hum of the tires beneath me like a heartbeat I could finally hear. I rolled the window down an inch and breathed in the wet pine air, sharp and alive. It reminded me of the woods behind our old house in Boise, the ones where I used to run when things got too loud inside. I used to hide there with a flashlight and a notebook, scribbling things I didn't have the courage to say out loud. Why doesn't she like me? Why does being good never feel good enough? What's wrong with me? Even back then, I knew the forest was the only place that didn't ask me to be someone else. Now, decades later, as I drove past the tree-lined roads of Oregon, that same feeling crept in again. A strange, quiet belonging. It's funny how the mind works when you're alone. The silence becomes an amplifier for every memory you thought you'd buried. By the time I reached the small town of Sisters, Oregon, it was almost 10 p.m. The gas station was nearly empty except for an old man refilling his truck and a dog sitting patiently in the passenger seat. I pulled up beside the pump, and as the fuel clicked on, I caught my reflection in the glass door. Tired eyes, coffee-stained hoodie, hair pulled back messily. I almost didn't recognize myself. Not because I looked different, but because I looked real. Not the version of Hannah who sat through family dinners pretending to laugh at Brittany's jokes. Not the one who smiled politely through their backhanded compliments. This Hannah was quieter, sharper. Like glass that had finally stopped pretending to be soft. When I went inside to pay, the cashier, a woman in her late 50s with kind eyes, smiled at me. Heading home or heading away from it? Her question was so simple it almost knocked the breath out of me. I smiled faintly. A little bit of both, I guess. She nodded knowingly. Holidays do that to people. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, sometimes leaving is the only way to see home for what it really is. Her words stayed with me long after I drove away. By midnight, I reached a small motel off the highway, one of those roadside places that smelled faintly of pine cleaner and nostalgia. The neon vacancy sign flickered as if it was tired too. Inside my room, the heater groaned to life. I kicked off my shoes and sat on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist, and that's when the ghosts began to visit. Not real ones, just memories, sharp as glass and just as fragile. I saw my mother, her voice clipped and precise. Don't slouch, Hannah. You always look so miserable. I saw my father, quiet but complicit, sitting at the head of the table pretending not to notice the tension as long as no one disturbed his peace. And I saw Brittany, always glowing, always adored. They weren't bad people, not exactly. Just people who loved in conditions, who measured affection by compliance. For a long time, I'd convinced myself that if I were better, nicer, prettier, more outgoing, maybe things would have been different. But deep down, I knew the truth. Some families don't have room for more than one favorite. The next morning, sunlight spilled weakly through the blinds. I checked my phone. A dozen missed calls. All from Mom. For a split second, my heart leapt. Maybe she regretted it. Maybe she was calling to apologize. But when I opened my voicemail, the first message shattered that hope. If you think you can just ignore us and act like some kind of victim, you're delusional, Hannah. Grow up. Family means forgiveness. Call your sister. She's crying because of you. Forgiveness. That word rolled around in my mind like poison disguised as honey. Forgiveness had always meant me apologizing for their behavior. It meant shrinking, smiling, swallowing my hurt to keep the peace. I deleted the message. Then another. Then all of them. By the time I reached the last one, I didn't feel guilt anymore, just exhaustion. I decided to take a walk before continuing the drive. The air was cold and thin, the kind that stings your cheeks and clears your thoughts. I walked along the edge of a narrow creek, the sound of water weaving through silence. Somewhere in that stillness, I thought of my grandfather, Richard. He was the only one who ever looked at me like I wasn't invisible. When I was little, he'd take me fishing and say things like, "You don't have to be loud to be seen, kiddo. Still water runs deep." He used to live in that cabin near Bend, the one that would later become my refuge. I remember the smell of cedar and smoke, his slow voice, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. He died when I was 16. My parents barely mentioned him after that. I always suspected it was because he liked me more than he liked them. Now, walking through the crisp Oregon air, I could almost hear him again. Slow, steady, patient. "If it hurts to stay, Hannah, maybe it's not home anymore." Back in my car, I sat for a long time before starting the engine. My hands rested on the steering wheel, the hum of distant traffic barely audible. I realized something. For years, I'd been trying to rewrite my family's story, trying to insert myself into a picture that had been framed without me. But what if I stopped trying? What if I let the picture be what it was? Incomplete. And painted my own. The thought both terrified and thrilled me. I stopped at a small diner for breakfast. The waitress, a young woman with a messy bun and an apron that read, "Grace Happens," brought me coffee and pancakes. "You traveling alone?" she asked, setting down the plate. "Yeah," I said. "Guess I am." She smiled. "Good for you. Most people don't have the guts to take off by themselves, especially around Thanksgiving." I laughed softly. "Guess I didn't get an invitation." Her face softened. "Sometimes that's the best kind." We shared a quiet smile. Then she left, and I sat there, the smell of syrup and coffee filling the air, thinking about how a stranger's kindness could feel more like home than my own mother's words. After breakfast, I got back on the road. The sky had cleared to a pale, trembling blue. Mountains rose in the distance, like old gods watching in silence. I rolled the window down and let the cold air whip through the car. Somewhere between the miles, I felt something uncoil inside me, a small thread of relief. For the first time, I wasn't rushing toward anything. I was simply moving away. Away from the noise. Away from the comparisons. Away from the endless loop of trying to be enough. And in that emptiness, I found space. That night, I stopped near a rest area overlooking a valley. The stars were sharp and bright, the kind of stars you never see in the city. I leaned against the hood of my car, arms wrapped around myself, the cold biting but bearable. For a moment, I felt small, a speck under a sky too big to care. And yet, I also felt infinite. I thought about all the versions of me that had existed. The little girl with the apple pie, the teenager washing dishes alone, the adult paying her parents' bills out of guilt. Each version had been waiting for someone to say, "You're enough, Hannah." But no one ever had. So I whispered it myself. "You're enough." The words came out shaky, then stronger. I said them again, and again, until they didn't sound like hope anymore. They sounded like truth. When I finally checked into another motel closer to Bend, it was past midnight again. The parking lot was half buried in frost. The air smelled like pine and cold metal. I lay in bed, eyes open, heart steady. My mind replayed the past like an old film reel, flickering, fading. Brittany's laughter, Mom's disappointment, Dad's silence. Each scene drifted through me like smoke, no longer heavy enough to choke. Somewhere between waking and sleep, I realized something simple but life-changing. I had spent my whole life chasing approval from people who were happiest when I was small. And now, by stepping away, I had become something they'd never understand. Free. The next morning, sunlight cracked through the curtains. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and looked out the window. A small sign on the roadside pointed left. Bend, 12 miles. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from recognition. The cabin. Grandpa's cabin. The one he'd written about. The one he said held peace. I didn't know if it still existed, if it had fallen apart or been swallowed by the woods. But somehow I knew I had to see it. Maybe I wasn't just driving away from my family. Maybe I was driving towards something my heart had always known was waiting. I started the engine. The road curved gently through a forest of pines dusted with snow. Sunlight spilled between branches like golden silk. And as the miles slipped away, so did the weight I'd carried my whole life. The road to Bend wound through miles of quiet pine forest, the kind of stillness that felt alive. Snow dusted the trees, and the morning sun turned the frost on the branches into glass. I drove slowly, not because of the icy roads, but because something in me didn't want to rush anymore. For the first time in years, I wasn't running late to anyone's expectations. When the sign for Cascade Ridge Road appeared, I slowed down and turned. The narrow gravel path curved deeper into the woods until, through a clearing, I saw it. The cabin. My grandfather's cabin. It stood there, half swallowed by time but still proud. The cedar logs had darkened with age and ivy climbed up one wall like an old scar. The small chimney leaned slightly, and the windows reflected the pale sky. But it was still there, a piece of my childhood that had somehow survived everything else. When I stepped out of the car, the air hit me like a baptism. Cold, crisp, and honest. No city noise, no voices. Just the crunch of snow beneath my boots, and the faint sigh of wind through the trees. I stood there for a long while, breathing it in. This place had once been my sanctuary. I remembered being 10 years old, sitting on the porch while Grandpa Richard whittled wood animals by the firelight. He used to hum old songs and say things like, "Peace isn't quiet, Hannah. It's when your heart stops flinching." Back then, I didn't understand what he meant. Now, standing there decades later, I did. The cabin door creaked open easily. Inside, the air smelled like cedar and dust, and faint traces of smoke still clung to the walls. The ghost of fires, long gone out. A thin layer of frost coated the windows from the inside. Everything was exactly how I remembered, only smaller. The wooden table in the corner still had the little scratches I'd made carving my initials. The stone fireplace stood cold, but waiting. The same old quilt lay folded neatly on the couch, faded but soft. It was strange, how something could be both frozen in time and alive with memory. I dropped my bag by the door and sat on the floor for a moment. My phone had no signal, no messages, no noise. For once, that didn't make me anxious. The quiet here wasn't punishment. It was protection. After starting a small fire in the hearth, I made instant coffee on the old camping stove. The warmth from the mug felt like forgiveness in my hands. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and slow, blanketing the trees in white. As I sipped, I noticed a small wooden box sitting on a shelf, one I didn't remember. My heart skipped. It was dusty, but the lid was carved with my grandfather's initials, RH. I set my coffee down and opened it carefully. Inside were a few folded papers, some old photos, and a small brass key tied with a ribbon. One of the photos stopped me. It was of Grandpa and me sitting on the porch, me grinning toothlessly, holding up a badly carved wooden bird. On the back, written in his handwriting, were the words, "To my quiet girl who sees what others miss." Beneath it was a letter, not the one I'd found before, but another, written later. The paper was yellowed and the ink faint, but the words still carried his voice. "Hannah, if you're reading this, I suppose the world has already tried to make you forget your worth. When it does, come back here. This place is not for hiding. It's for remembering who you are without the noise. The key is for the drawer under the table. There's something I meant to leave for you, but I never got the chance." Grandpa Richard. My throat tightened. My hands trembled slightly as I reached under the table he'd mentioned. There it was. A small drawer, half stuck from years of neglect. I pulled it open and found a weathered leather journal inside. The first page read, "The Reyes Family Ledger." At first, I thought it was some kind of record book. But as I flipped through the pages, I realized it wasn't numbers. It was letters. Letters written in my grandfather's handwriting, addressed not to me, but to my mother. The earliest one began, "Lydia, you are too hard on that girl." Each entry was a plea, gentle, firm, and full of quiet disappointment. He wrote about the way she favored Brittany, about how he saw me being pushed aside, about how love that comes with conditions isn't love at all. The last entry was dated 2 months before he died. "Lydia, I worry what will become of Hannah when I'm gone. She is stronger than she knows. But even strong hearts can break if you keep teaching them they're not enough. If you ever read this, please, stop trying to make her earn what you should have given freely." By the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking. Tears blurred the ink until it looked like rain. He had seen it all. He had known. And somehow, my mother had chosen to ignore even him. For hours, I sat there by the fire, the journal open on my lap. My mind was a tangle of grief and clarity. Every harsh word, every insult, every time I'd been made to feel guilty for existing. It all made sense now. My family didn't want balance. They wanted control. And control only works if the other person keeps apologizing. I thought about the years I'd spent sending money home, paying for their electricity, gas, water, even streaming services. Every time my mother said, "You're the responsible one," what she really meant was, "You're the useful one." It wasn't love. It was dependence disguised as duty. I opened my laptop using the cabin's faint solar generator to power it. I connected to my hotspot, watching the signal flicker weakly in the corner of the screen. One by one, I opened the accounts I'd been paying for: electricity, water, gas, internet, all linked to my name. Each window showed the same thing: autopay active. My mouse hovered over the first cancel button. My reflection stared back from the dark screen, the girl who used to flinch when someone raised their voice, the woman who'd spent years mistaking guilt for love. I whispered softly, almost like a prayer, "No more." Then I clicked. The system asked for confirmation. "Are you sure you want to cancel automatic payments for this account?" Yes. It asked for my name. I typed it slowly, deliberately. Hannah Reyes. When the gray checkmark appeared, the silence that followed felt seismic. I moved to the next account. Then the next. Then the next. Each click was small, almost anticlimactic. But each one broke something invisible. By the time I finished, my body felt lighter, as if I'd exhaled years of invisible labor. I shut the laptop and leaned back, staring at the fire. The flames cracked and danced, the light painting soft gold against the wooden walls. For years, I'd been the one keeping the lights on in a house that never wanted me. And now, for once, the lights were mine. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, slow and soundless. I walked to the door, opening it just enough to let the cold in. The flakes drifted against my skin, melting instantly. The world felt wide again. Somewhere deep inside, the guilt started to untangle. That lifelong guilt of being the wrong kind of daughter. The inconvenient one. The too quiet one. It didn't vanish all at once, but it loosened enough for me to breathe. I sat by the fire until dawn, watching the colors change from black to gray to soft blue. The journal lay open beside me, the last page marked by a line that seemed to echo through the cabin. "When you learn to stop begging for love, Hannah, you'll finally make space for peace." I didn't sleep that night, but I wasn't tired. I was awake. In every sense of the word. The next day, I drove into the small town of Bend to pick up supplies. The grocery store was crowded with people buying turkeys and cranberries, laughing, checking lists. It should have made me feel lonely, but it didn't. It just made me realize how much life I'd been missing while I was too busy trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. When I got to the register, the cashier smiled and said, "You hosting Thanksgiving too?" I almost said no. Then I paused. "Actually," I said, "yeah, I guess I am." "Big family?" she asked. I smiled faintly. Not the traditional kind. That night I sat outside the cabin again, wrapped in a blanket, the fire crackling. The snow was falling thicker now, soft flakes glowing orange in the light. I thought about all the people out there right now, the ones sitting through dinners that hurt, pretending to laugh through silence that suffocates, the ones who mistake being tolerated for being loved. And I realized something. Maybe there are more of me out there, the quiet ones, the outcasts, the ones who stopped being invited but still send gifts, the ones who get called dramatic for noticing cruelty. We're not broken. We're just learning to stop mistaking pain for connection. I took out my phone and opened social media, something I rarely used. I typed a post. Not for attention, but for release. My family banned me from Thanksgiving this year. Instead of crying, I'm hosting my own. Not for those who mock me, but for those who need warmth more. If you're alone this holiday, you're not broken. You're just becoming. I hesitated before hitting post, then smiled and did it anyway. Within an hour, messages began trickling in. Strangers from everywhere. People who'd been disowned, ignored, forgotten, sending hearts, comments, gratitude. One woman wrote, "My mother did the same. I thought I was the only one." Another said, "This made me cry. I'm sitting in my car outside my parents' house because I couldn't go inside. Thank you." I realized then that loneliness, when shared, becomes something softer, something like belonging. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. The fire died down to embers, the snow kept falling, and the world outside turned quiet as breath. When I woke up, sunlight poured through the window, touching everything gold. I brewed coffee, sat at the table with the old journal, and whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa." Then I opened my laptop and searched for local community shelters. The thought came gently, almost like a whisper from somewhere else. If my family didn't want me at their table, maybe I could build one for others. And just like that, a new kind of Thanksgiving began to take shape. One made not of tradition, but of choice. Snow blanketed the cabin roof like a soft sigh. Morning light seeped through the frosted windows, painting gold over the wooden floorboards. The world outside was silent, muffled under the white hush of a Bend winter. I woke up to the faint crackle of the dying fire and the smell of coffee still lingering from last night. My phone buzzed weakly on the table. A few missed calls from Mom, a text from Brittany. "So you're seriously ignoring everyone? Grow up, Hannah. You're embarrassing yourself." I stared at the message for a long minute, then simply turned the phone over. The screen went dark. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was sacred. For the first time in my life, their voices didn't reach me. I stood up and stretched, the cold biting gently at my skin. The cabin creaked, as if remembering that someone was finally living in it again. I tossed another log onto the fire, listening to the flames roar back to life. The journal from Grandpa still sat on the table, open to that last line. "When you learn to stop begging for love, Hannah, you'll finally make space for peace." I traced the words with my fingertips, as though the ink itself carried warmth. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before, a faint outline of paper hidden behind the back cover. I pulled gently, and a folded letter slipped out, sealed in an envelope yellowed with age. The front read, "To my granddaughter, when she's ready." My chest tightened. I didn't know if I was ready, but my hands were already trembling as I tore it open. The handwriting was unmistakable, steady, deliberate, the same loops and curls I remembered watching as a child while he wrote grocery lists and carved initials into wooden blocks. My dear Hannah, if this letter has found you, it means you've returned to the cabin. I hope the air still smells of pine and the creek still hums at night. I hope you can hear the peace I left here for you. I know you've been hurt, not by strangers, but by those who should have protected you. I saw it even when you were small. You used to sit by the fire and stare into the flames, quiet as snowfall. I could tell your silence wasn't shyness, it was survival. I tried to talk to your mother, but she carried her own pain like armor. She wanted to make you tough, but in doing so, she forgot to make you feel loved. I failed her in ways I cannot fix, but I hope I can help you heal, even after I'm gone. Inside this box, there's something that belongs to you, something your mother doesn't know about. I've left it behind the cabin wall, in the place where I used to hang my fishing rods. You'll find a loose board. Behind it is a small tin box. Whatever you find inside, know this: you are not your family's mistakes. You were never meant to be small so they could feel big. You were never meant to be invisible so they could shine. Love, Grandpa. The time I reached the last line, tears were already blurring the ink. I pressed the letter against my chest, as if I could somehow feel his heartbeat in the paper. Outside, the wind howled softly through the trees, almost like a whisper of approval. I stood and went to the far wall near the old fishing hooks. The boards were dusty, brittle with time. My hands shook as I pressed along the seams until one shifted slightly under my fingers. It was loose. I pried it open with the handle of a wooden spoon until it gave way with a small groan. Behind it was exactly what he'd promised: a small metal tin, tarnished but intact. I pulled it out and sat cross-legged on the floor before opening it. Inside were three things: a faded Polaroid of me as a child sitting on his lap, holding up a wooden carving of a bird, a silver locket shaped like a compass, a folded sheet of paper, yellowed and fragile. The paper was another letter, shorter this time, written in a hurry. If you're reading this, Hannah, then it's your turn to choose. I built this cabin to outlast pain. Inside the locket is a small key. It opens the safe deposit box at Cascade Community Bank. What's inside isn't just money, it's a choice. You can use it to build something of your own, a life that doesn't beg to be seen, but shines because you finally stopped asking permission to exist. My hand went to the locket. It was cold, the chain tangled and delicate. I opened it. Inside, as promised, was a tiny key, no bigger than my fingernail. For a long time, I sat there, the letter spread across my knees, staring into the firelight. I could almost hear his voice, soft and steady. Peace lives where courage begins. By noon, I was in town. The bank was a small building near the town square, warm lights glowing through the frosted glass. The teller, a kind woman with graying hair and a red scarf, looked up when I approached. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I think so," I said, sliding the small key across the counter. "It's from a deposit box. My grandfather's name was Richard Hayes." She smiled faintly. "Ah, Mr. Hayes, sweet man. We haven't seen anyone access his box in almost 15 years. She checked my ID, nodded, and disappeared into the back room. When she returned, she carried a small rectangular box covered in dust. She placed it on the counter gently. "Take your time." I nodded, my throat tightening as I lifted the lid. Inside were several envelopes, a few documents, and a leather-bound notebook. On top was a photo, my mother, young, holding me as a baby. Her eyes were softer then. The first envelope had my name on it. I opened it carefully. Inside was a check, $250,000, made out to me. But underneath the check was another note. "Money can't heal. but it can buy space to breathe. Don't waste this on proving your worth to those who can't see it. Build your peace instead. My eyes stung. Beneath the envelopes were old deeds, one for the cabin, another for a small plot of land near a lake called Stillwater Bay. The documents were signed over to me. I let out a shaky laugh that turned into a sob. He hadn't just left me memories. He'd left me freedom. When I left the bank, the air was sharp with cold, but I didn't feel it. The sky had turned silver, the kind of winter light that makes everything glow. I walked through the snow-lined streets of Bend, past shops decorated with pine garlands and lights. Everywhere I looked, people were preparing for Thanksgiving. Parents carried turkeys, kids held cups of cocoa, families laughing, bundled in scarves. For a moment, that old ache flickered, the ache of not belonging. But then I touched the locket around my neck and realized I wasn't missing out. I was starting over. Back at the cabin, I sat by the fire again with Grandpa's notebook. Inside were sketches, journal entries, and bits of advice written in his neat, deliberate script. One entry stood out. "The world will always try to make you small, Hannah, but don't shrink for them. The forest doesn't apologize for its quiet. The mountains don't whisper to be polite. You don't owe anyone your dimness." The words hit something deep inside me. That quiet, hidden place that had been told too many times to tone it down. Be grateful. Don't make a scene. I realized how many years I'd spent editing myself to be palatable. How often I'd turned down the volume on my own joy, just to keep peace with people who thrived on control. Not anymore. That evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, I cooked dinner in the cabin. Roasted vegetables, bread, soup from scratch. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, nourishing, mine. I lit candles, played old folk songs from my phone, and let the quiet fill in all the places where noise used to live. Halfway through dinner, I looked toward the chair across from me, the one Grandpa used to sit in. The firelight flickered over it, and for a moment, I could almost see him there, smiling softly, nodding like he already knew. I raised my glass. "To peace, old man," I whispered. "You were right." Later that night, snow started falling again, heavier this time, thick flakes swirling through the air. The world outside disappeared into white. I sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching it pile against the glass. My phone buzzed again. "Mom." "Hannah, your sister says you're being dramatic again. Are you seriously not coming home for Christmas either? Don't ruin another family holiday." I typed back slowly. "I'm not ruining anything. I'm just not attending pain anymore." Then I hit send, blocked her number, and turned off the phone. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt alive. The kind of alive that doesn't ask for permission. I looked down at the locket again, the compass charm glinting in the firelight. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was direction. It pointed towards something I hadn't had in years, a future that belonged to me. And as the snowstorm raged outside, I smiled, because I finally understood what my grandfather meant in his letter. Peace isn't a place you find. It's a home you build from everything that tried to break you. That night, I fell asleep to the sound of wind against the windows and the fire's low hum. And for the first time in my life, I didn't dream of escaping. I dreamed of staying. The first morning of Thanksgiving dawned pale and quiet. The sky over Bend was brushed in soft gray and rose, the kind of color that looks like it's holding its breath before snow. I woke early. The cabin was cold, breath visible in the air. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and for a brief moment, I thought about the years when I'd wake up to someone else's chaos. Mom shouting about undercooked turkeys, Brittany playing the victim because she forgot to help, Dad pretending not to notice. This morning, there was no shouting, just silence and peace. I pulled on my old sweater, the one Grandpa used to tease me about, calling it a walking blanket. Then I set water to boil, made coffee, and opened the curtains wide. Snow was still falling, slow and steady, coating the world outside in silver light. I sipped from my mug and whispered to myself, "Happy Thanksgiving, Hannah." The words didn't sting. They felt right. By mid-morning, I was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, music playing softly from an old speaker. I wasn't cooking for my family this time. Not the ones who'd taught me love had to be earned, but for strangers who had never known what love could taste like. Last night, after reading Grandpa's final letter, I'd called the local community center. The woman on the line, Elaine, sounded surprised when I asked if there were kids who had nowhere to go for Thanksgiving. "There's a group from the foster home," she'd said slowly, as if she wasn't sure I meant it. "5 of them, teenagers mostly. They've had a rough year." "Send them here," I'd replied. "Please, I'll handle everything." And now, my small wooden table was covered in groceries. Stuffing mix, fresh bread, vegetables, pumpkin pie filling, spices. The kind of abundance I'd never been allowed to feel proud of before. I spent hours chopping, roasting, stirring, my hands steady, my heart lighter than it had been in years. The cabin filled with warmth and smell, garlic, cinnamon, butter, and rosemary, the perfume of belonging. At 2 p.m., there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find 5 teenagers standing awkwardly in the snow, bundled in mismatched coats, cheeks flushed pink from the cold. Behind them was Elaine, smiling softly. "You must be Hannah," she said. "You really meant it, didn't you?" "I really did," I said, stepping aside. "Come in, everyone. It's freezing." They hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, eyes wide at the sight of the crackling fire and the smell of food. One of the boys, maybe 16, whispered, "It smells like an actual Thanksgiving." The smallest girl, probably 13, looked at me and asked shyly, "Are we allowed to sit on the couch?" I smiled. "You're allowed to sit wherever you want. This is your house today." Their faces softened, confusion giving way to cautious smiles. For the next few hours, the cabin filled with laughter and clumsy chaos, spilled gravy, burnt marshmallows on the sweet potatoes, too much salt in the mashed potatoes. But instead of frustration, there was laughter. They played old songs on my speaker, took turns stirring the pot, and told stories about their foster homes, their dreams, their favorite foods. One boy, Jamal, said he wanted to be a chef. Another girl, Mia, said she'd never had pumpkin pie before. I made sure she got the first slice. As they ate, I watched them, their chatter, their joy, the way they slowly began to relax. Something warm and unfamiliar settled in my chest. It was family, not the one I was born into, but the one I was building. After dinner, we sat around the fire with hot chocolate and marshmallows. The snow outside glowed under the moonlight, and the fire painted gold over their faces. Jamal looked around and said, "This is the best Thanksgiving I've ever had." The words hit me harder than I expected. I smiled, blinking back tears. "You know something? Me too." The girl who'd asked to sit on the couch leaned against me. Her head was small, warm, real. "You're nice," she mumbled. "You remind me of someone's mom." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat burned. "Thank you," I whispered. "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." Later, when everyone had fallen asleep, curled up under blankets near the fire, I stepped outside. The forest was silent, the air sharp and clean. Snowflakes drifted down slow as feathers. The moon hung low, painting the world silver. I stood there barefoot on the porch, the cold biting at my toes, and closed my eyes. The wind carried faint sounds, laughter from inside, the pop of wood in the fire, the soft breathing of people who finally felt safe. I tilted my head back, watching my breath rise into the night sky, and whispered to the darkness, "Can you see me now, Grandpa? I made it." Somewhere deep in the forest, a branch cracked, and a single owl called out. For a moment, I imagined it was him answering. The next morning, I woke to the sound of giggles and the smell of pancakes. The kids had taken over the kitchen. Jamal was flipping pancakes with one hand and nearly burning them. Mia was trying to mix cocoa with milk. "Happy morning after Thanksgiving!" she shouted when she saw me. I laughed. Actually laughed. The kind of laugh that starts in your stomach and feels like light. For a woman who'd once been called the one who kills the mood, it felt like magic. We ate breakfast together, messy and sweet. Afterward, Elaine came by to pick them up. They didn't want to leave. Mia hugged me tight, arms around my waist. "Can we come back next year?" she asked. I knelt down and smiled. "You can come back every year. This cabin's yours too." They piled into the van, waving as they drove off down the snowy road. I stood there long after the sound of the engine disappeared, the world quiet again. Only this time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt whole. I spent the afternoon cleaning up, humming to myself. Each dish washed felt like closing another chapter of my old life. The kind of closure that doesn't come with apologies or explanations, just peace. While putting away the last plate, I noticed something taped under one of the kitchen drawers. I pulled it free. It was a small note, written in Grandpa's handwriting. "Family isn't the ones who break you, Hannah. It's the ones who help you build again." Tears rolled down my cheeks before I even realized it. I looked around the cabin, the blankets, the crumbs, the empty cocoa mugs, and smiled. "You were right again, old man." That night, I sat by the fire with my journal and started writing, something I hadn't done in years. I wrote about the laughter, the warmth, the way the cabin had come alive again. About how peace had a sound, not silence, but gentle noise. I wrote about how it felt to stop waiting for love and start creating it. And I ended with a single line. This year, I wasn't banned from Thanksgiving. I was freed from it. As the fire crackled lower, I lay back on the couch and stared at the ceiling beams. I thought about my old life, the apartment in Portland, the phone calls that ended in guilt, the invisible girl who used to wash dishes while others laughed. She was gone now, not dead, just reborn. The snow fell harder outside, coating the world in stillness. The last log in the fire popped and hissed, sending a small shower of sparks into the air. And in that golden light, I could almost see him again. Grandpa Richard, sitting in his old chair, whittling wood, smiling at me. "You did good, kiddo," I imagined him saying. "You found where peace lives." I smiled back, whispering into the flicker, "I finally did." A week later, I went back to the bank in Bend. I opened another envelope from the deposit box I hadn't noticed before. Inside was a note written in familiar handwriting. Different this time, more recent. It wasn't Grandpa's. It was my father's. "Richard told me he left you the cabin. I didn't fight him. I knew someday you'd need a place away from your mother's noise. I wasn't brave enough to protect you back then, but I'm glad he did. I hope one day you'll forgive me for being silent. Love, Dad." I folded the letter carefully, holding it close. Maybe forgiveness didn't mean reopening doors. Maybe it just meant setting down the weight you've been carrying. I decided to stay in Bend, sold my Portland apartment, started volunteering at the same community center that had connected me to those kids. Each week, I'd see them again, Jamal helping in the kitchen, Mia drawing cards, the others learning to bake pies. The laughter in that place became a kind of healing music. The cabin became more than a home. It became a refuge, a sanctuary for anyone who needed warmth, not just during the holidays but all year round. And slowly, word spread. More people came, neighbors, volunteers, other foster teens. Every Thanksgiving after that, the table grew longer. By the third year, we had to eat outside under the trees, with lanterns hanging from the branches and snowflakes drifting through the firelight. Someone joked that we should call it the Lost and Found Thanksgiving. And I guess that's what it became. A place for the ones who were lost, to find themselves again. One night, years later, I stood at the same window, watching the snow fall like it always had. The fire crackled, laughter filled the air, and I realized something so simple it hurt. I hadn't just escaped my family. I'd become what I always needed: warmth, steadiness, love that didn't need proof. And as the cabin glowed like a lantern against the forest night, I thought of my mother's voice again. "You're banned from Thanksgiving, idiot." I smiled softly and whispered into the snow, "No, Mom, I just started my own."